The Psychedelic Revolution is brought to you by Gut Biome Bank. Your microbiome is essential for your health. That's why Gut Biome Bank is here, the world's first microbiome bacteria banking and storage company. Visit gutbiomebank.com today to learn more about how you can save your microbiome and invest in your long-term health. Welcome to the Psychedelic Revolution with your host, Magic Man. I have a special guest today. I have Peg Peters from the Gathering Group from up in Vancouver, Canada, joining us. And we're going to have a really interesting talk and go really deep on a lot of really cool ideas like the Eleusinian mysteries, where Peg is sort of an expert on. And I have a great interest in that ancient use of plant medicine as a society is what happened there. Well, Peg, tell us a little bit about yourself and the Gathering Group and what brings you to plant medicine.
Well, thanks a lot for having me, Kyle. We're really excited to be here. Anytime I get a chance to talk about group work and plant medicine, that it just gets me really excited because I just really, really believe that this revolution that's happening on our planet of consciousness being raised and people being healed through access to these plant medicines is really it really needs to come into community. This can't just be a medical model where there's two therapists and one individual. We just don't have the resources. We just don't have the therapist to be able to, help as many people as possible. We need models where people are embedded in community and we can heal while we belong to each other. And so that's kind of been a real heart for me, and I can kind of tell you the story. But so I'm excited to talk about that. So yeah, gathering groups is something my wife and I started. My wife's an elementary school teacher and a clinical therapist, and so we've been operating for about a year. And what we do is we put people into groups. So we screen them, they apply. We use nurses and therapists to screen, and then we create groups of between 6 and 8 people. Match them with usually a therapist and another facilitator. They journey for 8 weeks together online, preparing for a journey at a retreat, and then they all come together in person for an in-person medicine retreat at our retreat center in just outside of Vancouver. But we have a number of them that we're partnering with now across Canada. And then they integrate after their journey. They integrate that for 4 more weeks online with their group, with the real goal of we want to attach people to each other, not to a therapist. We want to attach them into this group. And then that group usually stays together for another 6 months without formal facilitation, because we give these people the tools of how to show up with one another in a really structured, trauma-informed model. And that has been working incredibly well. And we've been testing that and getting results. Both we're using an app called Quantified Citizen, which measures things like depression, anxiety, sleep scores, connectedness scores, both before they start the 12 weeks and then after, and then in a 6-month follow-up. And the results we're getting are just really stunning. 85% of people saying they no longer qualify as depressed after the model. PTSD scores dropping, cutting in half. So it's been absolutely stunning. We put about 280 people now through the program, and we have just been awarded a clinical trial with Health Canada, working with first responders. So these are firefighters and police officers and others. So that's going to be an above ground legal clinical trial using this 12-week, what we call a community of practice. And so that's we're really excited about that. We're also working with end of life patients, particularly with cancer. We've got a clinical trial coming up with that, putting people into groups and allowing them to co-regulate with one another so their nervous systems connect with other nervous systems so that they can really relax and feel at home and that there's belonging. And then it's in that context of connectedness and love and vulnerability that the medicine comes in after week 8. And it's when you start doing that. We've talked so much about integration, which is important. But what I've found in my research over the last 3 years is that preparation is way more important than integration. And we've really failed to prepare people well for these kinds of deep, deep altered state journeys. And it's really the communities of our Indigenous brothers and sisters that are really the kind of the North Star for us. They've been doing this work for thousands of years in community, not by themselves with one-on-one, but in a communal setting. And that's the stuff that's really awakened me. And I've tried to learn as much as I can from indigenous, even shamanic cultures that have used these plant medicines in communal ways to inform our gathering groups model. So that's kind of a little bit about gathering groups. And I'm willing to, dive into my own journey about how I got here if you're interested in that too.
Yeah, it sounds like a fantastic model because, the people get to know each other intimately before the psychedelic experience, and then I imagine they create great friendships afterwards. And maybe the whole group doesn't stay together, but maybe there's one or two people that become great friends and almost like sponsors in a AA setting. Like, I know it's not the same thing, but someone to call up, say, you can call me anytime when you're feeling those that PTSD coming in again, and we can talk through it, and they don't need to feel like maybe they're burdening the therapist, or they don't have to pay
and
for
as
the
much,
therapist.
Kyle, you nailed it. Like, as much as we don't want to think that we're burdening the therapist, there is a paid power dynamic that's going on in that. And therapists, my wife's a therapist, my best friend's I've done this, built this model with therapists, but they've come to me and saying, Peg, what we love about this model is that it begins to break down that hierarchy, because the therapist enters into the community of practice with everybody, answering the same questions, being just as vulnerable as them. The only thing is they are sober on the medicine day, holding space. They're not taking the medicine. And so what these therapists are telling me is that the model that they were trained in has to create, and they say it in these languages. This isn't my language. You have to be vulnerable enough so your client opens up, but not too vulnerable that they feel like, what, my therapist is kind of screwed up too. Like, I don't want to be with them, because we've given them this false notion that a therapist has their life together and I'm going over here to meet the therapist because my life is not all together. And that's a really false dynamic that we've put into the mental health profession. All of us that are working in this, we're wounded healers. We've all had trauma. We're all working through it. But it's when we can take that kind of hat of authority off and say, I'm just one of you, and I want to journey alongside of you in this group. And then I want you attached to others, so that, just like you said, when things go sideways and I'm having a rough day, I don't feel like, well, should I call my therapist? That's going to cost me $180 an hour. I can instead call 8 other individuals for free, and they're going to respond to me within minutes on my group chat, and they know exactly what I'm going through. And that's what the magic is of this community of practice, is that it's being held in the container of these other individuals. To me, this is kind of what we need in our world right now. We need places where people can belong and feel connected at their deepest soul.
I totally agree, and I really applaud you for creating that model, because it does integrate, the preparation and the integration, but then it continues on after that as well. So you're like, you do your program, but your healing never ends, really. You're not like done after that, but you can continue to work. And maybe, I don't know if you've seen this, but have similar groups come back together and said, we want to do it again together?
Yes, exactly. Like, it's really cool. So we have alumni groups now. And so we offer people who have gone through the group, they really understand the language of how we're witnessing each other in these groups, right? There's a certain protocol that we're teaching. And it really comes from a researcher named Dr. Shannon Dames at Vancouver Island University here on the West Coast. She's a nursing professor and was really looking at issues of resilience in nurses. She was noticing that nurses would graduate from the nursing program, and then within 5 years, about something like 60 or 50 to 60% of these nurses, young nurses, would end up leaving the profession because there's so much stress and anxiety in the healthcare system, right? It's an overworked system, and we don't have enough staff. And these people it's just overwhelming for them. And so she tried to design a model to teach resilience to these young nurses. And what she found in doing this model and creating this kind of platform was that she started using ketamine as illegal, and she started using ketamine in the program. And she was finding that people that would be off on long-term disability, particularly during COVID, a nurse would go off and be like, I'm just overwhelmed with the trauma I'm seeing. She'd put them into this 12-week model, use some ketamine as a way to lift them away from their default mode network, and they can begin to find that deep sense of their own purpose and their love again. And within 12 weeks, they were saying, listen, I'm feeling connected with this group of people, and I'm feeling connected in myself. I want to go back to work. I mean, that is a game changer. Because if you can think of this, particularly for insurance companies, right? When someone's on long-term disability, it's almost a write-off. And I've talked to insurance adjusters who say the moment we put someone on long-term disability, it's gone. Like we can't ever get them back. There's no amount of counseling that can bring them back, because what happens is they're more isolated than ever. Now they're at home, lonely, and they don't have the connection of work anymore. And so they actually get worse. So this model really was built by Shannon and her team. There's some other physicians, and Pam Crisco and Crosby, Dr. Crosby. And so there's a whole bunch of team that I got trained with them, and then began to realize, man, what if we didn't have to use ketamine, which is, it has its purposes, but what if we could use psilocybin? And we began to use it and work with a harm reduction model. We're lucky here in Canada that we have that we can operate in a gray area and allow people to source their own mushrooms. We don't buy or sell them, but people source them through a trusted source that's tested. They get sent to our retreat center, and then our nurses and our therapists act as harm reduction agents as they consume on site at our retreat center. And we hold them both prepared and then integrating them in this model. And it's working incredibly well. And psilocybin just has a gear that ketamine just doesn't have, particularly for kind of that deep connectedness and that deep mystical experience that people often have, which allows them to find the divine within them. And that's a really powerful experience for people.
Yeah, really impressed with the model. And one other thing that is coming out that I'd love to hear if this is actually true, that the therapists have a community as well, and mentors. And if something really difficult comes up, they're not isolated on an island. They can go back and check in with 3 other, I don't know how many therapists you have working,
we have 4, 2 facilitating the online portion, and then they're joined by 2 more on the day of, during the medicine day. And so there's always 4 people in the room, right? So you think about all the ethical challenges that we're having, even the MAPS clinical trials. We've been hearing, of sexual violation and consent to touch violations. You'd think, well, my goodness, I mean, that won't be happening if there's 2 therapists, but we are seeing it. So what we are seeing is we have 4 people in the room and 8 people, doing medicine. Sometimes we have 5 coming and holding space in one space. And so the opportunity for, just the safety is just through the roof, right? And so, as you said before, I don't want therapists doing this work on their own, particularly in the underground. They, what happens is everyone shares all their wonderful stories of, like, let me tell you about the client that saw the divine and healed their trauma. Everyone's going to tell those stories. But when do the therapists talk about the stories that don't go well? The integration experiences that aren't going well, the person that's depressed, who's more depressed now, 4 months later. Well, the therapist can't be honest about that because it'll badly reflect on them, and they're in the underground. So they can't really even have a place to share. So this model allows you to stay safe, to have great training. We train them, we give them access to medicine work so they can stay and work and develop a relationship with psilocybin, which is really important. If you want to do this work, you have to cultivate a relationship with this plant medicine. This is something that, it's not just something, well, I did it once and now I'm done as a therapist. And I'm like, no, I don't believe that at all. I believe as a therapist, if you are leading people into altered states, that you need to cultivate a relationship with this plant. And if you listen to Rachel Harris's new book, Swimming in the Sacred, she has a whole chapter on that where she interviews all of these underground the therapists that have been doing this work for a minimum of 20 years. These aren't people that just came online calling themselves a guru in the last 2 years. These are women, all women in her book, and they're all been doing the work for a minimum of 2 decades. And she asked them, what's the number one thing you say is important in doing this work? They all said, number one, you need to develop a relationship with this plant medicine if you want to do this work. Well, that's a really interesting statement, right? So this is important for us. We give people opportunity to stay in a network where they can be trained. We have an apprenticeship model where you're working with other therapists that are learning this group model and this dynamic, because it's different. You know, you're not sitting in a therapy room one-on-one hearing someone's story for an hour. You're in a group and you're learning to do emotional regulation. And it's all based on polyvagal theory. Stephen Levine and Stephen Porges and others, that really you understand that our nervous systems co-regulate with one another when we're in these kind of intimate circles. So we teach these models of how to do this work. And so, yeah, it's a beautiful model. And the therapists that we have on our team, 30 or 40 of them, they just love it. And they feel supported and connected because they're doing this work not alone, but as part of a large network of trained team.
Yeah, and even the people on the underground that would want to connect with others and share those hard stories and really improve. I mean, you see those veteran women and men who've been holding space. I mean, they're never stopped getting trained, and they're never stopped going to their own workshops and meeting connections. And you see, attempts to have, different groups where you can come together and talk about the subliminal, the trials and tribulations of being an underground guide, but to really have it formalized is amazing. And the other question I have, are the therapists on salary as well? So they're like not in a burnout kind of, the independent therapist, I think or the independent nurse, is the more likely to be burned out when they can say like, I'm stable. I don't have to take this client today. I can be on a normal work schedule and day off schedule as well.
Yeah, we don't have everyone on salary. We have some on salary in our leadership level as they're helping develop these protocols and our training and those kinds of things. But all of our facilitators and therapists are contracted, and so it's a good, what we say is we want this work to be accessible for you. You can do it if you have a laptop. You can do it anywhere you want in the world, as long as you can fly to our retreat site. So you can do this online work, and you can host these groups, and you can be paid well for it. And we do all the intake, we do all the screening. We take care of if there's someone that we flag early on that's got some conditions. So for instance, someone's might be applying, they've got bipolar 2. And we say, okay, you can come into a group and do this work, but we need you to be under the supervision of a therapist. And so, there's either their own, or we can have them with a therapy team so that you can do it in conjunction with it, right? So, and so our therapists both do still some one-on-one work, but also this group work, and they just find it so invigorating. It's not draining. Do one-on-one work is very emotionally draining. Holding these people's stories. This work is just it's inspiring, because you're realizing that everyone else in the group is also holding the stories of everybody. It's not just you. It's the entire group of 10 of you on the call that's holding this. And it just feels like, it feels like coming home, and I've run so many groups now, and I just love it. It's the highlight of my week when I get to drop in. Particularly, I'm doing a lot of men's work, and I have I run men's groups, and to see men on a call becoming vulnerable and open and honest with other men, and for the first time saying, I have never cried in front of other men. And this is the first time it's happened. And this is before medicine. Like, this is like weeks 5 or 6 in the group.
Right.
And they're opening up, being really vulnerable. And these men are holding them and responding to them from a heart place. No fixing, no therapizing, no storytelling, just holding the space for people to bring up difficult emotions. And we've got a model to do that, so that by the time we get to the medicine day, these men come together. Oh my gosh, it's hugs. It's just like, you are my brothers. It's a band of brothers as we go into this medicine work together. And there's huge bond, right, that happens. And so, I mean, we have co-ed groups and women's groups, but I I just have this real heart for men's work right now. Men have not been given safe spaces to be honest and vulnerable. And we have such a destructive masculine patriarchal culture that tells men this is what it means to be a man, is to suppress your emotions and to have it all together and to just keep it down, and then you wonder why men want to fix everything for everybody else. They've never been taught to sit in the pocket with uncomfortable emotions. They've never been given permission to do that. To me, that is like a tragedy of we've never taught men real strength. True masculine strength is the ability to sit in uncomfortable emotions without fixing, without trying to put the fire out right away, is to sit in that uncomfort and say, I'm going to hold this and just sit in that, and then, and when men go through this program, one of the things I get back from their wives is, what did you do with my husband? This is unbelievable. They now have an ability to sit and be present with me without being so distracted about the game, about this, about that. They've learned how to stay present for people's emotions. And that's what we're doing in this group work. And then you hit them with this big psilocybin experience, and their heart just is wide open, and they're just vulnerable, and they just feel the love both for themselves and for each other. I mean, it's really profound kind of healing work. And so the clinical trial that we're going to be doing with first responders, a majority of them are men, and these men have not been given safe spaces to talk about the stuff they see day after day and how to process that, right? So we're really excited to move forward with that.
Yeah, it's really exciting, and it sounds like a phenomenal model. Now, how did you personally get into plant medicine? Let's delve into your story.
Oh yeah, sure. Kyle, it's so funny, right? So my background is I was an ordained minister in evangelical Christianity, and I grew up in that, and became a religious studies professor at a Christian university, and found really quickly in my 20s and late 20s and early 30s that the worldview of the divine was really small, and it did not accommodate my own values, which were inclusion, love, and no fear. That perfect love casts out fear. So any kind of notion of the divine that engendered fear and alienation and exclusion was I couldn't be part of. And so the doctrines of hell were just, I had no kind of understanding how that's possible with a God that is of love. And so I began to do, my own graduate work was on trying to reform a Christianity that was really exclusive. It was exclusive to gay and lesbian folk. And it was, saying, no, we don't have any room for same-sex marriage. And I knew early on that was wrong. That the love of Jesus was wide open for whoever. And so I was in that turmoil inside as a minister. How do I stay in this church and yet, with my values of inclusion and love? And they clashed. And so eventually I had to leave. I had to leave both the Christian university I was part of and the church. And so ended up starting another community, a community of faith that was inclusive and open, with a friend of mine. It was called Nexus, and it was kind of an early, an inclusive community, right, where people could still ask questions about faith and life, but there was no talk of anyone going to hell. This was about how do we encounter that love of the divine. And so that was part of my own journey. And then the next thing that happened in my kind of story was that I started a nonprofit called Run for Water. And this was a charity that I ran for 15 years, that we were providing access to clean water in Ethiopia. We were working with women's groups there that were having to walk 6 to 7 hours a day to find clean water. And we started to work with an indigenous organization in Ethiopia called Imagine One Day, where they were providing education and water for communities in rural Ethiopia. And I got a real heart for that work. And while I'd be in Ethiopia, 3-4 times a year, and working with these communities. And what I discovered in those places was the level of resilience in these communities were just unbelievable. I was learning so much about the power of community and the power of ritual at providing a sense of place and belonging. So there would be these communities, they didn't have access to water, they didn't have a health clinic, Their rate of death of childbirth because of the lack of access to clean water was off the charts, was some of the highest in the world. And yet these communities would have love, connection, belonging, ritual around a fire. They would have ceremonies where they would feel a sense of, I'm being supported. And I would watch that, and these people would have love and laughter and joy. And yet they would be face to face with death and dying all the time. Their children would be dying, and they'd be like, yes, this is part of life, but we have each other. And I was just like, this is insane. I'd come home to wealth and affluence in Vancouver, and I would see people that are suffering with depression and anxiety that were millionaires, like, with tens and tens of millions of dollars and Lexus and all these kinds of things. And yet they didn't have joy. And I'm like, this is crazy. On one hand, here's a community of people that has so much joy and love, and they don't have challenges of mental health. And yet they have no water and they don't have healthcare. So, I was trying to make sense of all of that in my life. And then along comes psychedelics. And I read a book called Lost Connections by a guy named Johann Hari. And that book really outlines for me this rise of SSRIs and anxiety disorders in the West. And he looked at how is it that we had millions of people on a pill, that within 20, 30 years, that's how fast it went, right? And he looked at what's happened here. And what he did is he really looked at the lack of the institutions that used to provide meaning for us no longer are working for people. That we no longer have religious communities that people feel affinity to. The fastest growing people are people that call themselves spiritual but not religious. They're leaving Christianity, they're leaving Catholicism, they're leaving all of these kinds of faiths that once maybe held us together. And we no longer have clubs or places where we can really feel known and loved. We have people we work with, and we have people that we watch sports with at the bar, but who is the people that we can really tell the deepest parts of our soul to? And he looked at the downturn of those organizations and institutions, and he cross-referenced that with the rise of loneliness, of isolation, and of addiction and depression. And he rightly looks at the work of people like Gabor Mate and others that have really shown that the rise of addiction and the opioid addiction crisis that we face, and the downtown east side of Vancouver is world known for being one of the most chaotic, drug-addicted places on the planet. And he says this is a direct result of what happens when people no longer have family systems, structures, or spiritual communities that can hold them. All they are is now alone, without meaning or purpose. And the rise of these kind of anxiety and depression comes off the charts. And so I'm reading this, I'm experiencing this stuff in East Africa, and then I read another article from Johns Hopkins about the God molecule and these people that are at the end of their life, taking this, they're having this experience with high dose psilocybin, and they're meeting the divine for the first time and saying, I used to be scared of dying, and I know that I've got maybe 6 months to live, but after one session with psilocybin, I no longer have any fear of death. And I'm reading that going, this is matching the spiritual experiences of mystics that I've read throughout history. St. John of the Cross, all these others, Catherine of Siena, all these other places, these people that talk about these mystical experiences of the divine. And I'm like, I want to explore that. And so I came at it not from a kind of a need to heal trauma, but as a real passion, as a minister of like, how can I help people? How can I give them access to the divine so they can feel, whole? And so I had my first psilocybin experience about 5 years ago with a therapist, and it was nothing short of absolutely amazing. I go back to I just touch into that. I touch into that experience again when I think about it, and it's just so profound inside how it gave me a new understanding of who I am. And I suffer from ADHD, which is a superpower at times because it allows me to do a lot of cool creative stuff. but there's so much of my life, it just feels like there was like 30 people yelling at me in my head. And after that first experience of psilocybin, I came out of that and I said, after that journey, I said, it's quiet. It's quiet in here for the first time. And I felt like I had agency of how I wanted to use my mind, of what I could focus on. Now that started to diminish after my experience. And I realized that I needed to start doing creative, active things to continue to maintain that peace. Meditation, quiet, nature, cold plunges. All of these became tools for me to continue to be able to get me back into that quietness in my mind that I experienced on my psilocybin trip. And I'd be able to cultivate disciplines now so that I don't have to use psilocybin, all the time in order to feel that. I found ways of touching back, but now I know what it feels like and I know it's possible. So, I mean, that was my first experience of psilocybin. And so I began to pull all of these pieces together. This need for people to connect with one another, the need for ritual and ceremony, the need for group work, and this revolution that plant medicine could provide for our culture. And I began to pull them together, and then found the work at VIU with Roots to Thrive, and then started gathering groups as kind of my response, and along with my wife and a team of people around us. And so that's kind of, how I got into it. And I'm now working, I've got people in my community that I've pastored and been their minister, and now drawing them into this work of healing and transforming and building these communities in my local community. So that's kind of my heart.
That's a beautiful story. You mentioned that you bring in a lot of the shamanic teachings and wisdom of the indigenous people, and how do you bring that into the therapist gathering groups model, and the importance of bringing that wisdom forward?
Yeah. And that was a really key part of what we wanted to start with. And I had a friend, his name was Winchester. His name is still Winchester. He is an indigenous somatic healer, really works with the body. And he's from the Stolo First Nation here where I live. And I'd been cultivating a relationship with him, and really began to understand that the teachings of our indigenous brothers and sisters align so well, not just with the idea of working with plant medicines, which they've done for thousands of years, but their embodied practices, which are so much about recognizing that this plant, these fungi, have a spirit. And that when we come to it, we come with reverence, and we are asking this plant, this fungi, we are saying, we need your wisdom. And, and so he has a very different framework than just a medical model. This isn't just a pill that you take like Tylenol. What we recognize is as this is a plant spirit that you have to work with. And so we hear things like, why is set and setting so important, right? You could have the same molecule and take it at a rave, or take it with, at a party, or take it with ceremony, and it completely different experiences. So it's not one molecule equals this experience. Clearly, we've discovered, and the MAPS clinical trials have explored this, that there's something really important about the context in which you work with this plant medicine. And so if that's the case, well, we need to draw from those who have the most experience working with these plant medicines, particularly in group models. And the only people that I could find that have any history with this is our indigenous brothers and sisters. There's only one clinical trial on our planet that have ever looked at psilocybin being dosed in a group. It was done in the early 90s with AIDS, people that were suffering with AIDS, who had lost all of their friends from the AIDS epidemic. And they took a group and said, can we heal this group of people from the trauma and grief? And it was the only study done. Now, can you imagine that? We've never studied psilocybin in a group. And so to me, this is a tragedy. We need to study it and look at it. So I got no help from any clinical studies. So there's none on there. There's none out there in the world yet. And ours might be some of the first ones that we're doing in group work with psilocybin. But I began to draw from our indigenous brothers and sisters and ask, how do you guys work with plant medicines and do ceremony? And we began to bring teachers in that we recorded and filmed them teaching from an Indigenous perspective, and we use those teachings in our 12-week group. This is, like our very first week is all about the power of breath, right? And our Indigenous teacher says this. He says, when you are a baby and take in your first breath when you're born, you take in spirit. This is what they believe. You are spirit first. Then you are a body, and then you are emotions that come online, and then you are a thinking mind. But the mind is the last to come online, right? And it's a spirit first, body, emotions, and a thinking mind. And in the West, we've turned that on its head. We've said, well, we're a thinking mind first. And then we've got to figure all this other stuff out, and we don't even have a place for spirit. But our Indigenous brothers and sisters say, if you want to work with this medicine and you really, truly want to heal, you have to leave room for spirit. Now, it doesn't have to be religious. It just has to be an openness to the recognition that there are something larger going on than just me, and that I exist in connection with others, with connection to trees and water and plants and each other, and into my own parts inside. And so we use these teachings as a way to really help people ground some of these practices, these tools of how to breathe, of how to get to know breath, about how to witness and sit in discomfort. And they have practices about this. And so they would teach this. And so we've really tried to incorporate these teachings to the best we can without trying to recolonize their teachings. They're offering this to us as colonizers, right? I mean, I'm saying to my friends that are doing this with me, I said, well, we're the colonizers and we made these practices illegal. Like, we would imprison and kill and their shamans. This happened in Canada, right? We put them in residential schools and said, you can't use your language. And if you speak your language, we're going to put a pin through your tongue as a 5-year-old. That happened. I've talked to elders in Canada that exact thing happened. And yet their language is their key connection to spirit for them, because they have ways of language usage that helps them outside of kind of an English language to understand. There's words for like connection to water. They don't have a word for just water. Their word for water, which is QO, means that which provides life to us. That's a different word than water. That which provides life to us is different, right? And so when you take away language, you're taking away their connection to their land, and that was intentional by the government of Canada and the Catholic Church. It was intentionally trying to do this, right? We wanted to take the Indian out of them, was the quote, right, from the federal government. And so this is an act of reconciliation, of bringing these teachers back in and saying, can you be the ones that guide us into this work? And I'm working right now with a men's group where I'm co-leading with an Indigenous elder. And I'm bringing the best of Western science, research, polyvagal theory, internal family systems, these kinds of Western models. And he's bringing Indigenous teachings. And he's talking to us about, how they would cold plunge way before it was cool with Wim Hof. They'd stand in a river and let the water flow at you. And you ask the spirit of the river, and you dip your face in 4 times, right? And you're asking for the spirit of the river to come wash over you. Then you turn your back and let the water hit you from behind, and you ask, what do I need to let go of while I'm in this freezing water? What patterns in my life do I need to let go of and free and let it go to the river? I mean, those are ancient. They've been doing that for thousands of years. And then Wim Hof was kind of making it cool again, right? So there's so many practices that we as colonizers are being gifted to by our Indigenous brothers and sisters. And it's something we need now. And we need to honor these people who've gone before us and have kept a connection to land and plants as healing tools for us as human beings to connect back to spirit.
Yeah, it's a really great perspective and a great way to approach it, with real respect for the teachings, and also acknowledging the harm that our white heritage and the colonization and of these indigenous lands, all the harm that's caused, without acknowledging that and asking for forgiveness and help to move forward.
Yeah.
I know you had a great trip this summer to Greece. and got to visit some of the Eleusinian mysteries. And I know you talked
Mm.
about some of the, identifying with the mystics and the elements of the
Mhm.
Bible, but maybe we can talk about your experience at the Eleusinian mysteries. I think we're both big fans of Brian Marescu
Oh,
and the
man.
Immortality Key. I
Yeah.
think his work is one of the most important works to come out in probably ever, about redefining, history and the history of religion. And anyone who doesn't know, the basic thesis is that religion was kind of formed from psychedelic mystery cults, beginning with the Eleusinian mysteries in ancient Greece. And it's interesting because the
Yeah.
Eleusinian mysteries had a whole bunch of preparation, and
Mhm.
it wasn't just a one-time thing, but you had to be, well, you can speak to it better, but
Yeah.
my understanding is you had to be invited into a group,
Mhm.
and you
Yeah.
did, maybe it was like a 2-year process, and then you would do like a big fast and a long walk
Mhm.
to get there,
Yeah.
some physical trials and tribulations, and then you'd go through a mystery that we're not, we assume that there was some psychedelic version from the ergot, which is a, derivative of,
Of
well,
LSD.
LSD, similar to LSD. So yeah,
Yeah.
when we can speak
Yeah.
about your thoughts on this.
Yeah, no, it was an incredible transformative experience for me. I was in Switzerland and actually started my journey in Basel, Switzerland, and I did this Basel is the home of Albert Hofmann, who synthesized both LSD and psilocybin from the mushrooms he got from Oaxaca, Mexico, from Maria Sabina. I just actually came back from Oaxaca 2 days ago, so we can talk about that too. But
Sure.
um, so I was in Basel, Switzerland, at the Sandoz laboratory there, and I did the famous bike ride where you can get on a bike, go from the Sandoz laboratory to where Albert Hofmann lived when he first got LSD. He had synthesized it in 1942 and did this famous ride where he was feeling the hallucinations coming on, and he's like, "What is this?" No one had any reference for this, so you don't have any research behind it. But he actually thought he was going to die and started writing that in his journal, like, this might be my end. I'm feeling kind of slipping in and out of awareness and consciousness, but that was the first journey he took. And so I did that bike ride as kind of an honor of Hoffman, and I had read his book, The Road to Eleusis. And in that, he's joined with Carl Ruck, who's a classicist scholar. And they both go to Athens, and because there is interest in looking at the connection between this psychedelic mystery religion that took place in ancient Athens, just outside of Athens in Eleusis. The town of Eleusis is about 20 kilometers west of Athens on the coast. And it had operated for about 1,700 years, almost 2,000 years, uninterrupted, with a yearly experience that happened. And Hoffman wanted to explore that, and he realized that this ergot mushroom that grew on the barley in Eleusis, you can have that. There's the scene in Gladiator where you see, Russell Crowe, his hand goes across the grain, and he's thinking about the next life, the time to come, and he's facing his own mortality. Those are the fields of Eleusis. They're trying to replicate those fields of barley. That's where the ergot mushrooms grew. And there were ancient priestesses that knew how to extract those mushrooms and be able to put it into the kukion, the beverage that would be used in Eleusis as people came on their journey. And this was a beautiful, incredible process. And so I wanted to go there and follow Albert Hofmann's kind of tracks and be able to kind of look at these. How did they do it? What was all involved? And so I was very fortunate to connect with an amazing lady named Dr. Sylvia. She was from the University of Athens. Her expertise is in ancient archaeology with a specialization in the Eleusinian mysteries. And so I got to spend 10 hours with her one-on-one, and we spent the day together. And we started in Athens, where the mysteries start. It starts in a graveyard. And I remember that morning this was this summer in August, and she said, "You know what? We're going to start it just the way you would start, back with Plato, Socrates, Aristotle, Sophocles. This is Marcus Aurelius. All of these ancient people that took place and did these mysteries. They all started in the graveyard in Athens." And the way it starts is, the way you actually, she asked me to stand by a grave. She said, go walk through a graveyard here. It's public. Find a name. It's in Greek, doesn't matter. And you look at some of the dates and things that are carved, and they have some information there. And we're talking about this graveyard is like 2,500 years old. I mean, it was pretty crazy to be in a graveyard where people have been buried for 2,500 years there. And she said, it starts by you doing some personal reflection. Ask yourself, who do you want to be when you die? What do you want to be known for? What are your values in life? You are going to face death one day. And so take moments right now in the quietness in this graveyard and ask yourself, am I living the life that I want to live, that I want to be known for? I mean, what an incredible start for a day with an archaeologist, right? So, she really did kind of unpacked it for me and talked about how people, as you rightly said, you would have to be sponsored in by someone who had already gone through the initiation process. They would invite you in. There's usually groups of 20 that would form. A lot of times it would be neighbors and family that would form, and they would be kind of a group. You would do 6 months in advance. They would call the little mysteries, which would be taking place at the spring equinox. And there would be a kind of a process that would start them looking at the reflection of who you want to be. And then it always took place in September every year. And they would have up to 5,000 people going to the temple in Eleusis. And it was a massive temple. There's just ruins now there. And we got to walk through them and see there. There's a little, now a new kind of archaeological museum there where they've put all some of the artifacts in there. And they just built that a couple years ago. But you go to this temple site, and where there'd be up to 5,000 people tripping at once. I mean, it's the first Burning Man. It's like everyone is there, and it's in utter darkness. So you go in with torches, and the torches are snuffed out, and you sit and you take the kukion as a group, and then you go off into your space, and everyone's got their little spaces. But there's music and chanting and drumming. And it reminded me so much of kind of how indigenous people use longhouses and using altered state with drums, right? Drumming is a deeply shamanic instrument tool to allow for altered state and trance work. We see that across the world, right? Same thing. They'd have drums and music and chanting, and you would take this kukion, this LSD drink, spiked with the same kind of alkaloids as what would be in modern day LSD now that Hoffman identified. And they would take this, they would consume this beverage, and then have like a 12-hour journey in darkness. And then they would, emerge into the light at the end of their journey with a celebration that they faced their mortality. They faced their own death. And people would experience the divine within them. Like, that's what's so unique, is that this was an initiation for whatever religion you wanted to follow. It didn't matter. It was open to males, females, slaves, or free. That's an amazing line, right? Think about that, right? Slavery was alive and well in Greece, but in order to do this mystery, in order to do the Eleusinian, mystery, you were on an equal playing field with everyone else. The emperor, the kings, the priest, doesn't matter. We're on the same footing as the slaves, as girls, as women. And so this was the great equalizer. And this was not, and this is what's so important and why I love Brian Marescu's book, is he so rightly points out that what's unique about these mysteries is that it moved beyond dogma. See, what we face today is belief, mind-oriented religion. What's your belief? I believe differently than you. I believe in this. I don't believe in that. I believe in Muhammad. I believe in Jesus. I believe in, Moses. And so then we can fight, because we can fight about external beliefs. You can kill someone over their wrong beliefs. But what you can't do is argue with your own personal, this is what I experienced, right? And so these mysteries were about individuals having an experience for themselves, not another belief to believe in, another doctrine to, it's about, you are going to be confronted by your own shadow, and you're going to connect with the divine within you as a human being. You're going to connect with that. And so that was really central to the ideas of what they were doing there at Eleusis. And it was communal. There was a long prep, a minimum of 6 months. Sometimes you'd have to wait up to a year or two, as you rightly say, but a minimum of 6 months prep. There was fasting. There was your body gets cleaned, and you're really paying attention to the whatever's happening in your body during your experience. And this practice became something that was transformative. And the people that wrote about it, it was a big mystery. You weren't allowed to talk about kind of what happened. And so we have to piece it together from those that did leave some written record. And we can look at the early Christian emperor in the 4th century that outlawed the mysteries and said, we want to tear these temples down. We do not want people accessing God without a male priest, said the Christian emperor. We want everyone to have to go through Rome, through a male priest, not have your own access to the divine. So the Christian emperor outlawed them, made them, if you did them, they're punishable by death, and then tore the temples down as a pagan ritual. And that was one of the darkest moments of our history, is when the Christian church outlawed these practices that were the level playing field for everyone on the planet. And we made a new patriarchy. You had to be male, and you had to be, in order to have access to God. And women were outlawed from serving communion, and the women were serving these as priests. And Morescu,
Demeter
yes,
cult of women,
yes,
that did everything.
It was all women, and a lot of it grandmothers doing this, and that got outlawed by the Christian emperors as well. And so you have this deep, dark, the patriarchy sets in its horrendous kind of 15 bloody year histories of men dominating this and preventing people from accessing their birthright, which is to feel the connection to the divine within, right? And I spent a lot of times in Ethiopia, and the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, which is it never got tainted by Roman Catholicism, because it was started in about the 3rd century in Ethiopia, and kind of was kind of a separate kind of Christian religion there. And I talked to my friends that are priests there in Ethiopia, and they say at the heart of their Christian thinking is a doctrine called theosis. And theosis in the Eastern Orthodox tradition is the idea that you are divine within you, that the teachings of Jesus is that to call you back to your true nature. They don't believe in original sin. That's a Western doctrine. That's a very Western idea that you're born evil, right? And you have to get saved by God. Ethiopian Orthodox don't believe that. You're born pure, and that life comes in and trauma comes in and clouds us from our birthright of knowing who we really are. And that this idea of theosis, the divine within, is what they teach. And so there's such deep ancient alignment with that idea of the Eleusinian mysteries and doctrines of theosis that we find in certain forms of Christianity. And so I just feel these webs of these threads that are still alive in these Western traditions. And I think Brian Mirescu's book, which is showing the pagan continuity, showing that these Eleusinian mysteries got brought into the Christian practice of communion, and that the wine that they were serving in these underground churches, when it was illegal up until the 4th century, Christianity was illegal. They were serving a spiked Eucharist that had traces of this ergot mushroom. And now they're doing these archaeobotany where they're scraping vessels and be able to use DNA evidence to show what was in these wine vessels in these Christian churches. And sure enough, they're finding it in unique places like in Spain. They're finding these churches that have been using this Eleusinian mystery vibe of a spiked Eucharist to allow people to have access to the divine themselves, to have a true mystical experience. They talk about the body and blood of God, of Christ. Well, it's no longer a wafer and kind of grape juice. It really is the fruit of the gods. It really is the fruit of God, and you are taking that in and feeling the divine within for the first time. That's to me a powerful Eucharist, right? So yeah, the Eleusinian Mysteries was an incredible piece of history that not a lot of people know about. And it's because the Christian church has, pushed it down. They mocked Carl Ruck and Albert Hoffman when they put out this book in the 70s. Carl Ruck was a classicist at the University of Chicago, and his whole department just thought he was crazy. And now people like Brian Marescu are showing that, no, he was onto something here. And there's a huge new opening because of science, because of archaeobotany, proving that his hypotheses were in fact right.
Yeah, it's really amazing. And once you read that book, you kind of look at things really differently. We see all the false stories in news today, but now look at the false stories in history, right? Like, what was the false stories from that 4th century AD going on? And we have documented evidence of, the pogroms that killed all the women, and even as up until the 16th century. They're still trying to snuff out this, divine feminine psychedelic influence, even 1,000 years after that first, only male priests can be in charge. It's really interesting to see the rise of, the Mary Magdalene story as well, picking up steam along with the Eleusinian mysteries recently as well. And I don't know what to make of all that, but it's certainly really interesting that, it really comes back to that original Christ consciousness of the divine inside you, rather than needing Christ to heal you.
From like an outside male God that sits up in the sky that I pray to kind of change things for my good or whatever, and it really shifts it. And you're right to point out, like the scholarship around Mary Magdalene and the Gospel of Mary. I mean, this happened in our lifetime, right? I mean, in the 50s, right? Well, so not my lifetime. I was born in 1970, but in our century, they discover in the Dead Sea Scrolls copies of Mary's Gospel that had been outlawed by the 4th century church because they don't want a woman talking to them about Jesus, right? And yet here we have a Gospel of Mary that scholars know was being circulated and being used, written and authored by Mary. That's probably the oldest known gospel. It predates all the other 4, and it speaks of a very, very different type of Jesus. There's a bunch of pages missing, but it really speaks about an inner understanding of the divine. That you want to know, where is God? God is found within. It's God is, you split, and it's very similar to the Gospel of Thomas. It's another kind of Gnostic gospel that gets pushed out and not put into the canon, right, by the men that make up the rules for what books get included.
Enoch,
of course, they're going to say
another one, correct?
It's just crazy, So of course you're going to say, well, no, Mary, let's chuck that one out. But the research around Mary Magdalene, her history, her influence, and her sense of a corrective of the divine feminine is really needed in our day and age. And there's some incredible books out. Megan Waterstone, what's her name? She has an incredible book on Mary Magdalene. If I can remember, I think it's her name, Mary Magdalene, and I'll remember her name in a second.
No, we'll put it in the show notes. We'll follow up with that.
We'll put it in the show notes. But just a brilliant book on Mary Magdalene and her journey to understand that tradition. And so recommend it big time for people. We need people reading the Gospel of Mary and the Gospel of Thomas in our day and age, because it helps bring a corrective to the teachings that have been so one-sided of a God that's out there versus a God that's right here inside.
Yeah, what's really interesting, and just something I learned just the other day, is that there are 3 copies of the Gospel of Mary Magdalene, and in each one of them, 7 pages are missing.
Yeah.
So like even the hidden Gospels, they still strip those 7 pages, and it's like, what is in that 7 pages is really fascinating.
Yeah.
Now you mentioned you just came back from the Oaxaca as well, and what was that experience like? And maybe how to piece. We're coming from Greece, and now we're going to Mexico, and we're coming out of the shamanic teachings from the Pacific Northwest.
Yeah, amazing,
bring it all
right?
together.
Yeah, it's great. What a great question. I love those kind of things that pull it together. So I mean, it was kind of funny. I was actually going down. My mom and dad are in their late 80s, 87, and so we were celebrating my mom's birthday and went to a resort there, and it just kind of like just booked it. Not even really thought of it. It just was like, oh, booked the resort, went down for her birthday, and it was a really beautiful time to spend with my aging parents who are so supportive of the work that my wife and I are doing, and they're deeply, Christian and conservative, and yet they really see that this is real. Like this stuff needs to come into our world, and we want, they're like, we're supporting you. We want you to help heal first responders, and this is a plant medicine that needs to be accessible, and so it's really cool. But while I was there, I meet some locals, and they're like, "Well, you're in the province of Oaxaca. This is in just in the mountains." They point to the mountains. This is where Maria Sabina is from, and there's a Mazatec group of people that don't speak Spanish. So I'll just give a little background. So Maria Sabina is the godmother of psilocybin mushrooms, right? So they were first looked at in the 50s by R. Gordon Wasson, who wrote an article for Life magazine, and he did a trip. He'd heard about this a mushrooms cult in the mountains of Mexico that were continuing the lineage that they had read about by friars from the 15th century, that when they landed in Brazil and in the Inca, these friars wrote about people that looked drunk. They would take these mushrooms, they would look drunk, but it'd be in the middle of the afternoon, and then they'd claim to see God, and they would use it for all sorts of ceremonies. And so we have evidence that we knew that there was that mushrooms were being used in religious ceremonies by the Mazatec and Inca people. And we have that recorded. Well, that lineage of the Mazatec tradition made its way up into Mexico, and it was kept alive by this tribe of people in the mountains of Mexico. And one of their healers was named Maria Sabina, who was using these mushrooms as a way to heal. As a shaman would use them in community. She would take them and have insight and use them with you, and sometimes you'd use it with your family. But that was kind of her story. And so this group of writers and thinkers, including Albert Hoffman, who shows up again, he travels to Mexico in the 50s to be able to, he wants to know, I want to know what's in these magic mushrooms, what these mushrooms. And so he actually goes and has an experience himself, Hoffman does, and has an incredible, he has this incredible spiritual experience on mushrooms with Maria Sabina, and she was syncretic, right? And so what this means is that over 500 years since the Spanish landed, forms of Catholic Christianity has been woven into these ceremonies that now use mushrooms. So Maria Sabina has a big picture of Jesus, there, and she's praying to the Holy Spirit and talking to Jesus and taking the mushrooms and doing all this other stuff. And yet this is how it's evolved in her culture. Again, she didn't speak any Spanish. She spoke Mazatec and had this really powerful way of working with mushrooms to help people heal in a religious ceremony that Albert Hoffman got to experience. He took the mushroom back to Basel, Switzerland, back to Sandoz Laboratories, and he wanted to understand what is the active ingredient in there. And he looked at it, found the molecular structure, and named it psilocybin. So the word psilocybin came about from Albert Hoffman's synthesis of mushrooms that he got from Maria Sabina in the highlands of Oaxaca, Mexico, when he got a chance to experience this divine encounter and experience God within him while high on psilocybin mushrooms in that place. And so I got a chance to go there and meet. So I didn't go to her town, but I met some local healers who work with that mushroom and who are part of that tradition. And there was a really cool painting of her that I stood beside, and she's got this sacred tobacco. I'll send the picture to you. You can put it in your show notes of me by this really cool painting of Maria Sabina with all these mushrooms around her. And so really got the story and history of that place from these people. And it's those mushrooms that began to kind of find their way into the hands of people like Terence and Dennis McKenna, and who got those mushrooms in the 70s and said, listen, particularly when psilocybin was or mushrooms became illegal as Schedule 1, those brothers early in the 70s knew that there is a possibility that the CIA and the FBI will try to destroy all of the access to mushrooms. And so they started to cultivate a little booklet where it teaches people how to cultivate psilocybin mushrooms at home. And they started to spread that. And they would send spores in the mail with instructions on how to grow mushrooms to keep these mushrooms alive out of the hands of the authorities, when it became illegal. And so Dennis McKenna is a friend of mine. He just lives down the street, a couple of kilometers from me here in Abbotsford, just outside of Vancouver. He's retiring here. And so I really credit him and his brother for keeping the access to psilocybin mushrooms available for my generation, who is now gets to study them and to use them. So that's a little bit about Maria Sabina and kind of the work they're done there. But I guess I want to highlight that we have to understand that the history of these, both LSD, which is from in the ergot, in the Eleusinian mysteries, and psilocybin mushrooms, its history going back to places like the Maria Sabina, they're all religious ceremonies. Like, they're not done in a medical model. They were done in community, with family, with your father and mother present a lot of the times, with your kids present. And so for us to take these molecules and try to take them out of that context and just try to medicalize them, I get that we need to kind of figure them out and test them. But we've got to understand the context in which they came and why those traditions lasted for centuries. They lasted that long. For in the case of Maria Sabina, at least 500 years, way longer we know than that. But it lasted that long because it was done in community. And so I think that's really key in how we put forward the next model of how we bring them into the West. I think we need to bring them into models that can hold community, and we could build community centers that are doing this work, and we could build apprentices and people in your local community that you could do this work once a year, maybe, or once every 4 years, doesn't matter, but we can get access to people cheaply and authentically through a community-based model.
Yeah, I think that's the key. I really do. If I look back at even the way that cannabis has developed, there's like the dispensary model is not a community center, right? You take your medicine, you leave and go home and use it. Whereas I think that we really need to have a community center that can become, a place where people can eat together and dance together and do mushrooms together. But more than that, do community, everything to do with community.
Yeah.
And it's just be one facet of, the psychedelic healing and the resources is one facet of that community center.
Yeah,
like
I totally agree, Kyle. And I just love that you're seeing that as a vision. And we see that gathering groups could become a catalyst to that, as we're working now with clinics in different cities, and they're wanting to incorporate this group model in their clinic. And what they're finding is that as people go through the program, they're starting these, well, can we do meetup groups? Can we meet once a month? Can we have, come together in person? And so what we're finding is that, yes, it's accessible online anywhere in the world. You can take a gathering group anywhere that you have access to a smartphone. And then all you need to do is be able to come to, one of our retreat centers. And so we're starting them all over in Kingston, Ontario, and Vancouver Island. And we've got another one we're going to be working with in Mexico, actually in Oaxaca, which is one of the reasons I was there. And so there's opportunities for us to build these community centers by using this group work and building an alumni team of people that all have shared values and a passion to heal their community, but want to do that in connection with others, not on their own. That excites me.
Yeah, me too. It's really great. And then there's that safety net, and there's that ability to, like we started this podcast, call your friend without burdening the head of the center.
Yeah.
you don't always
Yeah.
need the head of the center to be sitting there 24/7 on call. There'll be
Yeah.
other resources that can trickle down. Of course, the center head can be available, when you need it, and it gets, it's like going to the chief of police.
Mhm.
He's not
Mhm.
always out there doing the walking the streets at night. There's a whole network of people,
Yeah.
keeping
Mhm.
people safe and whatnot. Another thing that came up, which is really interesting in this modern psychedelic revolution or renaissance, we'll use psychedelic revolution since this is the psychedelic
Mhm.
revolution podcast, but that the access to grow your own mushrooms wasn't available in the 60s.
That's
We
right.
think about it, we look at Alice in Wonderland and the mushrooms and toadstools, and they were certainly around, and people were knowledgeable about the powers of psychedelic mushrooms, but the ability to grow your own mushrooms in your own home now is really something revolutionary. Because before the and maybe you can correct me, you probably know more about this, but the Sandoz acid was like the first access to psychedelics, and they
Yeah.
gave those out to therapists or basically anyone that signed up.
Yeah.
That's the Ken Kesey and all those merry pranksters, and Osley was making that acid, Stanley Osley, and that was like the beginning of the 60s revolution, but that wasn't widely available, to the masses.
Yeah.
Whereas you see the like Mothers on Mushrooms and
Mhm.
all these other groups coming together, because you can come together and you can grow your own. And when you grow your own, it also is a great community model of like grow, gather, gift, because when you successfully
Mhm.
have a mushroom grow, you have more than you need, more than 10 people need, and then you start to give it away to the community, and it
Mhm.
just kind of flows naturally. It seems like a really perfect new model to bring in.
Yeah. I really do think so. And I mean, I had a interesting, I was approached by a lawyer, a constitutional lawyer, a couple weeks ago, and she said, Peg, you really need to do a charter challenge in Canada based on religious use of psilocybin mushrooms. And I'd love to represent you. You're a minister. You've led a congregation. Start a congregation that doesn't have like religious dogma. It has practices. It's based on participation in practice in a community. And we could argue at the case, at the Canadian Charter, that Canadians, for religious purposes, should have access to these entheogens, these God manifesting mushrooms that can be used in a sacramental way. Well, they could be part of, spiritual communities, community centers could be planted all across the country based on that model. And it wouldn't be just for, hey, just grab mushrooms and go nuts. It's do it in this way. Do it with these kind of people, with these elders, with this training. And so, the Santo Daime Church out of Brazil has shown that this is possible. And a good friend of mine, Dr. Jessica Rochester, who's the head of the Santo Daime Church of Canada, her and I have chatted a number of times, and she said, Peg, like, it took me 10 years to get the Canadian government and the Center for, the Office of Controlled Substances to allow me to import ayahuasca. But the reason that they finally gave in was I said, listen, we're not just giving ayahuasca out to whoever. You have to be part of our church community and be part of a 6-month prep. And then you can take this kind of, take the sacrament. And she said, and so there's a precedent now in Canada that I argued successfully for the religious right to use psychedelics as part of a religious ceremony. Now, the Santo Daime Church is a real religion, a real kind of faith that has Christian roots and background. But maybe there's something new here for us to create spiritual centers and almost like new temples, new Eleusinian temples across the country, as places that have exemption, that if you want to belong to this community center and do it in this kind of format with the therapists and all the checks and balances that we have, maybe that's where it should start, exemption for these kind of community churches. So anyways, I'm fascinated, and I might end up taking her up on that offer and do a charter challenge.
Yeah, that'd be amazing. And I know there's a big Santo Daime lawsuit in the United States as well. I'm not too versed on all the details, but the model that comes to my mind, and I've really thought about this as well a lot, is that it's almost like a yacht club model. right? Where like you're a member of your local club, but if you sail your boat, 1,000 miles, you have all access to that other club, right?
Hmm.
And you're not part of that other club, but it's this universal
Hmm.
community center psychedelic. You're not becoming the member of that church when you're over
Hmm.
there, but it's a resource you can visit and celebrate with, and take a
Hmm.
shower and whatnot, and whatever
Yeah.
spiritual
Yeah,
steeping shower.
it's an I mean, I think we just it's brand new. Like we're trying to figure this out now as a culture. We know we need these medicines. We know that these are incredibly powerful at healing depression, anxiety, PTSD, cluster headaches, end of life cancer distress. I mean, I was executive producer of Dosed, A Trip of a Lifetime, which is a story of a good friend of mine, Lori Brooks, who was given an end of life cancer diagnosis. And I asked if we could film her story, if she was willing to do psychedelics. And so she did. She let us film her story for 2 years. And her life was transformed by one high dose experience with psilocybin. She no longer had a fear of death and no longer was thinking about cancer. She was able to be present in her life with her marriage and her children. And she's still alive. And she's one of our facilitators now, helping other cancer patients, work. She's going to be sitting on Friday with people in our facility, helping them as they're navigating their own cancer diagnosis. She can help others. I mean, that's a powerful story, right? So this is what is potential, but we need these medicines to be accessible. They need to be, to me, they need to be paid for. I think this whole program should be paid for by healthcare, particularly in Canada, where we have a healthcare system that's paid for by our taxes. So to me, why is this private? This should not be private and only accessible for those people who have money. This should be accessible for anyone in Canada, regardless of how much money they have or not. This should be your right to be able to have access to whatever kind of treatment that's going to help you. And my brother's a physician, and he says, you know what? They give me the right to take someone's life at the end of their life in Canada with medical assistance and dying. They trust me as a physician to kill people on my recommendation as a doctor, and yet they won't give me something that grows in the ground that might help them live a life, and so it's just absurd. And we will look back on this, on the war on drugs, and particularly on the war on psychedelics. We will look back in about 20 years and go, oh my goodness, how far up our own butt did we have our heads on this one? This is insane that we made this stuff illegal when this is a medicine that can really help people in our time, and they need it. So let's give it to our physicians. Let's let them and our therapists be able to be at least the first ones to give this to people if they think they need it. So I'm a big advocate for access for whoever needs it.
Yeah, me as well. Well, it's great to hear about your model being able to scale as well, and being able to grow to meet the demand. It's been really wonderful to talk to you and hear your passion and all the great work you're doing. I mean, I'm really aligned with everything you've said, and it's really a beautiful message to see the movement. What came to me is in that 20 years or 50 years, when instead of the therapist having to have experience with the psychedelics, maybe the politicians will.
Oh
Right?
man, wouldn't that
Can
be
you imagine?
amazing, right? What
Yeah.
if that was the case? Because this was the case in Greece. In order to serve, they would encourage you to go do the mystery, go do that, find out who you really are before you want to lead us as a people, right? So, this is emperors, everyone. I mean, wouldn't that be incredible to be able to say, yeah, in order to become a politician and make policy, you have to at least do at least one psychedelic trip to be able to be confronted by the deepest parts of you and to be able to let go of some of those traumas so you're not continually perpetuating models of violence and aggression that are so often perpetuated in our modern political scene. I love being on the show, Kyle. Thank you so much for your questions and your openness. If people are interested in exploring, you can check out gatheringgroups.ca, and anyone around the world, you can apply and get into a group, and then just fly out to one of our retreat sites where we do the retreats. So thanks so much, Kyle. It's been really cool.
Yeah, it's been great, and we'll put all the show notes together as well. So
Awesome.
Thank you, Peg.
Okay, have a great day, Kyle. Cheers.
Good.
This is is Magic Man's daughter. Thank you so much for listening. Please give him a 5-star rating. He works fucking hard to make this podcast, and it's awesome. Just like him. Thank you. 5 stars only.